just lose the picture.
All right. Welcome everybody to a new year, or welcome Sherry to a new year. And a new year, we're going to talk about the Torah in terms of general themes. We're so often when we discuss Torah, we know some of the general themes, or the general plot lines. We know about the Avos. We know about Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. We know about various places, Mitzrayim, Canaan, maybe Moab, the desert. We know that Vayikra is about sacrifices, even if we don't necessarily know the detail about sacrifices. We know that Sefer Devarim is Moshe's last speech, even if we don't know all the details of it. And some of us go deeper. We go online, we listen to a Parsha, or maybe we'll read Divrei Torah online. So one question might be, what can I add in 1 hour when we spend, some of us spend hours per week on the Parsha, and I'm going to try to do the whole Torah in 1 hour. So I want to give a different perspective here. We tend to think of the Torah in terms of Parshas, or maybe chapters, but Hashem actually didn't give it to us that way. In fact, thinking of it that way alone is a mistake. So first of all, Christians invented the chapters. And I like to point to two great examples. One example is the thing we say on Friday night, when we talk about and all the work was complete, and we talk about the seventh day. Those verses are from the beginning of chapter 2, which is something that Jews would never do. They would never put that section in a different chapter, because Shabbos is the culmination of all of creation. It would clearly be in chapter 1 if Jews were in charge of that. But Christians invented the chapters and the numbering system, and we started using them because it was a convenient way to discuss them. Especially when we got involved in the disputations and we had to debate the Christians about these things. And I'll save the second example for a second, in a couple of minutes. So even the Parshas are a much later development from when we got the Torah. In fact, in Eretz Yisrael, they read the Torah on a 3-year cycle, or a 3.5-year cycle. And so every 2 cycles was then every 7 years, and maybe that's what Hakel was about. That's what people think. And then later on, when we were in Bavel, they wanted to read the Torah once through every year, so then they divided it up into 54 parshas, which is what we do now. But that came about, at least 1,000 years after we got the Torah. That's not the way that Hashem gave us the Torah. So we not only make a mistake by thinking of the Torah in terms of chapters and parshas, we also make the mistake of almost never thinking about it as 5 books. Chazal tell us that there are 24 books in the Tanakh, and 5 of those 24 are the Torah. And that's actually a crucially important point. There are only 2 divisions that Hashem gave us. Parshas and books, and so I might have just sounded like I contradicted myself, but the way the original meaning of the word parsha, I will show you here. I'm gonna try to share screen. This is a little section of the Torah, and you see here there are here we go. You see parts that are blank spaces. Parsha really, in terms of Torah lingo, sort of means paragraph. And there's 2 different kinds of parshas. They're the what's called the sealed ones, the stuma, which means that it's a little space in the middle of a line. And there are the larger ones. It's called Pesucha, which means opened. And that's one where a line ends and it's a space all the way to the end of the line. And those are really, in a sense, like paragraph subdivisions. Then when you open your Chumash, you actually can see that. This is just a total random page of Chumash. This Samech here means it's a stuma, which means it's a space of approximately 9 letters or so. And here you see a pei, the very bottom here. That means Pesucha, that means it's blank until the end of the line. All right, I'm going to stop the share. So those are the natural breaks. If Jews were in charge of chapters, they would use things like that. So here's my other example of how the Christians, when they invented chapters, didn't look at that part and conceived of things differently. And my second example, which I really love, are chapters 18 and 19 of Bereshis. Chapter 18 is when the angels are coming to visit Abraham and Sarah, and they're going to tell them that they're going to have a baby within a year, and Sarah laughs, and that story. And chapter 19 is the story of Sodom and Lot. So according to Jewish thought, in the Torah, there's no breaks at all, no stuma, no pesucha. It's all just one big block of text. Clearly, Hashem intended us to read those two chapters together, and so again, Jews wouldn't call them separate chapters if we had our druthers. And when you think of it that way, you get more out of it in that particular instance. So the beginning of chapter 18, Avram is praised for having an open tent and hospitality. And then they go to Sodom, where hospitality is against the law, but Lot gets into trouble because he offers hospitality to the angels, to the guests. So you lose something by not even realizing those two parts are together. In any event, okay, so that's the Torah type definition of Parsha. The other, let's see if I can do this here. The other division that Hashem gave us was breaks in the were the breaks between the books. So let me try to share screen again, see if I can get. So here's the division between, let's see, between Vayikra and Bamidbar. So you can see there's a break of 4 lines between each book. So the point is that Hashem gave us 2 breaks, or subdivided the Torah into 2 parts. He subdivided it into books, 5 books, and then further subdivided it into parshas, but by parsha I mean paragraph. And we almost never think of the books that way. The books have themes, and this is what today's discussion is going to be about. So the Torah is about 5,800 and something Pesukim, verses, and we didn't break them into books because such a thing is too long. Granted, it is long, but rather Hashem gave it to us that way, and each book has a theme. So what we're going to discuss is the theme of each of the 5 books. And as you'll see, it's really interesting. This is sort of a new wave of a new school of Torah interpretation, is that we don't even need any commentaries for this. We can uncover the theme simply by looking at the text. And you, Sherry, as a poet, would really appreciate this kind of thing. We're going to look at it almost literarily, and we're going to look at the simple meaning of the text. But the difference between what we're doing now and what almost all Torah commentaries do is that we're going to take a bird's eye global view of the text, look at as opposed to examining a particular word or examining a particular pasuk and how it may conflict or support some other pasuk. Okay, so with that, welcome, Anne. With that, we can let's ask the question about the first book. What is Sefer Bereshis, the book of Genesis? What is it about? So, Chazal, the sages actually gave names to the books, which talk a little bit about, explain the books a little bit. So, Sefer Bereshis, Genesis, Chazal gave it two names. They call it Sefer HaYashar, which is the book of the upright, and we'll get back to that in a minute, or Sefer Yetzirah, which means formation or creation in a sense. And in fact, if you think about it, the fact that the sages had names for each of these books shows you that this idea is not crazy, that each book has a theme. Exodus was Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption. Vayikra is, Leviticus is called Torah's Kohanim, which means the laws of the priests. Bamidbar is called Sefer HaPekudim, which sort of means, actually sort of means the book of Numbers, which is what in English people call that book, which is sort of weird because there's a census at the beginning and there's a census 2/3 of the way through, but mostly the book is about everything in the desert, which is why all the stories that happen in the desert, which is why we call it Sefer Bamidbar, in the desert, right? The story of Korach and the spies and all those things during 38 of the years in the desert. It's covered by Sefer Bamidbar. Devarim, the last book, is called Mishnah Torah, which literally here means a repetition of the Torah, which is also sort of a weird name, but we'll get to that. All right, so I want to share one other, the document that I uploaded, but I'll bring it up on the screen. Just give me a moment here. Here we go. All right, here we go. So if you ask most people what is Sefer Bereshis about, they will talk about what's in the second column, which is what I want to first talk about. And this is a thematic summary of the plot line of Sefer Bereshis, all of Sefer Bereshis in 8 parts. Here we go. So there's the creation, obviously. A. B is the sin, which is actually 2 sins, right? There's a sin of the eating from the tree, and there's also that Cain killed Hevel. And then the expulsion from Gan Eden, and then Cain is also exiled. Then we have 10 generations from Adam to Noach, culminating in the flood, so that Hashem can sort of start over again. Noach has 3 sons. One of them is cursed. One of them is like the good son, Shem. And that leads us to the Tower of Babel. And that is the dispersion of mankind. The second sub-theme in terms of plot is the creation of the Jewish people. So we have a long section on Avraham and Sarah, a short section on Yitzchak, a long section on Yaakov, and then the last 14 chapters are pretty much mostly just about Yosef, or you'd say the tribes or Yosef. Good. So those are all the big themes of Sefer Bereshis. But what is the point of all these stories? So we can look, and I don't mean any disrespect by asking that question, because actually I'm asking the same question as the very famous first Rashi on all of Chumash. He asked essentially the same question. The way he phrases it is, after the first opening line, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, Rashi says, what do I need this pasuk for? If the Torah is a book of laws, the laws given to the Jewish people don't start until chapter 12 in Exodus, why not just start the Torah there? And then he gives an answer. His answer is that So the Jews should know when people come to take the land of Israel from them, the Jews should know that God gave it to them and that God can give the land to anybody who he wants to. But if you think about it, that only answers essentially what the first chapter is doing there. His answer doesn't explain the other 49 chapters of Genesis, of Bereshis. So we have to ask: are all these 50? Is the book of Bereshis just a prequel to what comes after that? The Ramban actually challenges Rashi's answer. He doesn't like it. He says, no, there is a point to this book. And he says we need to be inspired and to know what it means to be a Jew. And that's why, and he gets his clue from the fact that the sages in the times of the Gemara even called the book Sefer Yesharim, which means the book of the upright. It's how to be an upright person. We learn our midos from the avos. We take the examples of Avram and his chesed, and Yitzhak and his gevura, and etc. And we learn how to be an upright, morally upstanding person. In fact, the Gemara tells us there's the famous phrase "derech eretz kadma laTorah," which means literally it means, well, it could mean two things. One interpretation is for each of us individually. If we don't have derech eretz, if we don't have the basic midos, Torah is going to be useless to us because we're not going to be able to internalize it. Another way to look at it, I think, is that it's explaining the structure of the Torah. We learn derech eretz from Sefer Bereshis, and then we can get the Torah in the next book. So his answer explains some of the stories and what the stories are doing there, but it doesn't really explain an entire organizing theme. So that's what we are going to do, that introduction. So what I want to do now is look at the left-hand column. I want to skip number 1 right now. If you look at 2 through 11, each of those, let me back up a minute. Literarily, is that you're the expert? I don't know if that's a word, but looking at it from a literature point of view, if you look at how the author, meaning Hashem, if you look at how the author divides up the book, there are 10 times, and 10 right away is a tip-off that something special is going on here. There are 10 times when the Torah says Eila Toldos, followed by a word or a name. Actually, I think each time it's a name. So let's start at number 3 there with Adam. It says, oh, well, wait, what does Toldos mean? So Toldos comes from the word Yalad, to give birth, right? We say Yom Haledes, which means happy birthday. Yeladim means children, etc. So Toldos can mean children, it can mean offspring. It could also mean offspring in a abstract sense. For example, subcategories might be called Toldos. They are called Toldos when we talk about, say, the malachas that you can't do on Shabbos. The subcategories are called Toldos. But basically it means children or offspring. So from a literary point of view, this book is about origins, Toldos, or children. So if we start at number 3 on the left-hand side, we see Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam. So this is the story of the generations of Adam. And then we get the Toldos of Noach, and then we get the Toldos of Bnei Noach, and then we get the Eila Toldos Shem, Eila Toldos Terach. So that's a big clue. Now let's back up to number 2. Number 2, it says, Eila Toldos Hashemayim v'haaretz, which is interesting because if you translate it like the other instances of Eila Toldos, you would get, these are the children of the heavens and the earth, which sort of doesn't make sense. And so if you go look at chapter 2, verse 4, It'd be interesting to look at various translations. I looked at two. So one of them said, I wrote it down here, one of them said, these are the stories of the heaven and the earth. Another translation said, these are the products of the heaven and the earth. But you could actually think of it as these are the children of the heavens and the earth. So what does the children mean? What follows that? Just a couple of Pesukim later, it says that Hashem, this is the second story of creation, it says that Hashem took the earth and formed it into a person, and then Hashem blew breath into it, and Adam was created. And this was before Adam and Eve were differentiated. So by Adam, I mean all of mankind, or Adam and Chava. So we have Adam and Chava are actually the children of the earth and the heavens, right there. So now let's summarize. So this explains how the world came into being. It's a book of origins. It's a book of offsprings, and this is the key: is that it's much more than that. And now we're going to really dig in deep to the meaning here. If we think about this again, just looking at the outlines that we've presented, and that and the stories that we all know already, that happens in Bereshis. When Hashem started the world, who was supposed to be the chosen nation? The answer is the whole world was. Then when we get to the next book, Sefer Shmos, we see that the chosen nation is Israel. So if you ask, how did it come to be that Hashem chose a nation rather than humanity? How did we get from universalism to particularism? How did we get from all of humanity to just the Jewish people? The answer is Sefer Bereshis. And if you follow both the plot lines and this literary structure, the two boxes here that we see on the top of the page, we can see that. So let's look at the left-hand side again. So the whole world is supposed to be the chosen nation. Hashem should not have needed a chosen people. Adam and Chava were the children of heaven and earth. That's the first Eila told us. But as we know, Adam sins, is kicked out of Gan Eden. Cain sins, goes into exile. So Hashem Hashem is trying, or he's waiting for the people to do better. There's 10 generations from Adam to Noach. And by the 10th generation, the whole world is completely corrupt, except for Noach, and Hashem cannot choose them. So Hashem has to try again. So this is the second attempt at universalism. So all of humanity is destroyed, and the only person who is righteous is Noach. So Noach, again, represents all of humanity, and all his descendants are going to be all of humanity. This is going to be universalism again. But he's starting with a purified version because Hashem killed everybody else. But that didn't work either, right? Right after Ham is cursed after what he does to Noach, right after the end of the flood story. But Shem is righteous, so we get Eila told us Shem, because he didn't sin. But the descendants of Shem, even that didn't work out. Because that leads up to the story of Bavel. Hashem had to disperse everybody. So now Hashem's going to narrow it down. So he chooses Terach. We get Eila Terach. Why doesn't it say Eila told us Abraham? That's actually a complicated question that could take a half hour of itself. So I'm not going to answer that. But for right now, it's sort of let's take Terach and Abraham as the same person. So he's the founder of the Jewish people. So is that the end of it? No, he's not a nation either. Rather, he is the father of many nations. Terach is the father of many nations. So is Abraham. So now we have Eila told us for Yishmael. What is that about? what it's about is that it's telling us that these are the origins, the beginning of the nation that comes from Yishmael. He founds his own nation, so it too is an origin story. And then we get Eila Toldos Esav, same description. He founds his own nation, and it's an origin story. Finally, we get to Eila Toldos Yaakov, and the descendants of Yaakov. At the end of the book of Bereshis, the book ends with 70 people, and Shemos starts with picking up the story of those 70 people. So Bereshis answers one question, and the question is, how do we get from Adam being chosen, representing all of humanity, to Yaakov being chosen, who is only the father of the Jewish people? How did it happen that Hashem went from all of humanity to a small band, a single chosen nation? And that is what the theme of Bereshis is. So if we look at it that way, this actually answers a lot of questions in the plot lines. I thought of 4 of them today. So here are 4 examples. Why does Sarah insist on throwing Ishmael out of the camp? And the answer is that perhaps she knew or sensed that he was not to be a part of, or was inappropriate to be part of, a chosen nation. It's the same question and the same answer with Rivka and Yitzchak. Why did, even though their children, her twins, Esav and Yaakov, were twins, she clearly knew that Esav was not an appropriate person to carry on this Abrahamic tradition. So now we understand why this whole business, why she was so insistent on switching the blessings that Yitzhak was going to give, and why that was her main mission, was to engineer that plot line, that plot twist. Yitzchak himself, and this is also worth a whole nother share. If you look at the narrative closely, he gives, after the brachas are switched, he gives a bracha to Yitzchak, and Esav says, "Don't you have anything for me?" And Yitzchak says, "Actually, I do. I gave almost everything to Yaakov, but here's another bracha, I can give to you." And then after that, Yaakov is about to flee, and Yitzchak gives him another blessing. How do you even explain that? So one way to explain it is that Yitzchak intended for Yaakov to get the spiritual blessing, not the physical blessings, but the spiritual blessings all along. He wasn't tricked for anything. He intended that. And why? And so you might answer, why did Yitzchak withhold? He wasn't tricked. Why did he withhold the spiritual blessing until to Yaakov at the end? And again, he figured, well, look, Avram only had one son who carried on the tradition. The same with me. Only one son is going to carry on the tradition. And Yaakov is the appropriate one. So he gives a spiritual blessing to Yaakov. This idea of selecting the right person to found the nation that's going to be God's chosen people is also an answer to one of the answers to the question when Yosef was sold into Egypt. We know that Yosef, for 17 years, Yosef never tried to contact his family while he was in Mitzrayim. So one answer is very simple. He says, look, my grandfather Avraham only had one child who carried on the tradition. Actually, that would be his great-grandfather. His grandfather Yitzhak only had one child who carried on the tradition. And he figures, you know what, I guess my father only has one child who carries on the tradition also, and I'm not the one. Actually, there's one more instance that we can bring here. There's a medrash where Yaakov is on his deathbed, and all his sons are surrounding him, and he wants to tell his children about the end of days. He's going to tell them when Mashiach is coming. And just as he is about to tell them, he forgets, it escapes his mind, and he can't remember. And then he says to himself, you know what? Not all of my children are worthy. I guess just like my forefathers, only one of their children carry on the tradition. I guess out of my 12 sons, only one of them is going to carry on the tradition. And his children sense that they are upset, and according to Midrash, the children, to comfort him, all together, simultaneously, all together say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Echad. And he says, Baruch Shem Kavod Machasel Olam V'ed. That's the way the Midrash goes. So us looking at it, we know the 12 tribes of Israel. We're wondering, how can Yaakov think that? But looking at it from Yaakov's point of view, again, it makes perfect sense, right? My grandfather only had one child carrying on the tradition. My father only had one child to carry on the tradition. I guess, it's too much for me to expect that all 12 of my sons are going to carry on the tradition. So again, Bereshis answers one question. How do we get from Adam Harishon, or Adam and Chava, being chosen, representing all of humanity, to a small band, a single chosen nation? And that is the theme of Bereshis. Do not be worried that we spent the first half of this talking only about one book. The other books are a lot simpler. And next week we are going to talk about the other 4 books and sum them up. And that is the end of this week's presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me hitting stop share here. Okay, if I'm going to stop the recording now.